The glass door exploded inward at 3:22 in the morning. Vivien Bennett fell through it like a body dropping from a bridge. 29 years old but looking like life had stolen 30 more. Dark hair plastered to her pale face. Blood soaking through her denim jacket from a knife wound that split her ribs like a blade through butter. The wound was deep. The bleeding would not stop. She hit the black and white checkered floor of Café du Monde and her hand scraped against the cold tile. The smell hit her then, chicory coffee mixing with copper, with her own blood, with the ghost of 1,000 sleepless nights. Outside the frost-covered windows, New Orleans lay sleeping under a sky so clear it hurt to look at. Diamond-sharp stars hung above the French Quarter like they were watching. She stumbled forward, reaching out to steady herself on the nearest booth. Her vision swam. The diner tilted. The booth belonged to Matteo Vitoli. He sat alone in that corner, nursing espresso at an hour when most men were home with their families or dead. Matteo Vitoli did not sleep. Matteo Vitoli was 42 years old, dressed in a suit that cost $3,000, the kind of suit that made poor people look away. Dark hair silvered at the temples. A scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone like someone had tried to erase his face and failed. Two men flanked him, Sergio on his left, Sal on his right, both mid-sentence about something that would never matter again. Vivien's blooded hand touched the booth edge to steady herself. Then Matteo's face changed. His hand flew to his chest. His breath came short and sharp. His men froze. The conversation died. In the fluorescent hum of the diner's dying lights, the most powerful crime boss in New Orleans began to collapse forward like a puppet with its strings cut. Vivien did not think. She did not hesitate. She dropped to her knees beside him, ripping open his white shirt with shaking hands. Blood on her hands. His blood now mixing with her own. His men started to move, hands reaching toward their jackets, but she was already there. She was already pressing the heel of her hand to his chest and counting. 1, 2, 3. 30 compressions. Fast. Hard. Brutal. She tilted his head back. She opened his mouth. She breathed into him twice, tasting blood and espresso and fear. The diner held its breath. No one moved. Sergio and Sal stood frozen, watching a homeless woman with $34 in her pocket and a backpack full of everything she owned save the life of the most powerful man in the city. Watching her press her hands to his chest again. Counting. Breathing. Fighting. 90 seconds passed like a century. His eyes flickered. His chest rose. She whispered it, her voice trembling like a candle in the wind, "Stay with me. Stay with me." He stared up at her. His grey eyes found hers and held. Something moved in that moment, something neither of them understood yet, something that would bind their fates together like a curse that could not be erased. Sergio finally moved. His phone was already to his ear. A doctor would be here in 3 minutes. An ambulance would not come. An ambulance meant police. Matteo Vitoli did not call police. But what was about to happen, what neither of them could possibly foresee in that moment, would tear through the city like a blade through silk and change everything. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning to understand how Vivien Bennett ended up bleeding on that floor at 3:22 in the morning. 8 hours earlier, she was still invisible. The shift at the Riverside Diner had been brutal. 12 hours on her feet, carrying plates that weighed more than hope, smiling at people who looked through her like she was made of air. She was made of air. She was nobody. Just another waitress with hollow eyes and calloused hands, moving through the kitchen like a ghost. The manager, Pete, threw her a wadded-up $50 bill at the end of her shift. $50 for 12 hours. Before taxes it would be 32. She had counted on 70. The math was impossible. She sat in her car at 2:15 in the morning. The car was a 2003 Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and a check engine light that had been on for 6 months. It was parked in a lot behind the diner, hidden from the street. This was where she slept now. She had been sleeping in this car for 4 months. She pulled out her wallet. Cracked leather, held together with a rubber band. The cash drawer inside held $17.18. Not 32 from tonight's tips. 17. She had stopped asking why people did not tip. She had stopped asking a lot of things. In the backseat of the car, her entire life fit in a torn army backpack. 2 pairs of pants. 3 shirts, all faded. A sweater with a hole in the elbow. Socks with holes in the heels. A toothbrush she had found at a CVS loss prevention bin. A phone with no plan, just Wi-Fi when she was lucky. And a single photograph, creased, worn soft at the edges, of a boy who had been 5 years old the last time she held him. His name was Micah. The photograph was from 6 years ago. He would be 11 now. She did not know if he was still in the city. She did not know anything anymore except that the courts had taken him, that Derek Collins had lied and paid off judges, that the system had decided she was unfit because she could not afford a lawyer and he could afford 10. Derek Collins was the reason she was bleeding at 3:22 in the morning. He had found her last night, lurking near the diner parking lot at closing time. Derek was 48 years old, muscular, with the kind of face that people trusted until it was too late. He had tattoos running up both arms, a cross on one wrist, his ex-wife's name crossed out on the other. He worked construction, or said he did. Mostly he worked at destroying people. He had been Micah's stepfather for 2 years. He had hated her from the beginning, hated that she loved Micah, hated that Micah sometimes called her Mama. When she tried to leave him, Derek had started lying. He told the court she was unstable. He told them she drank. He told them she had men over. He told them everything and the judge believed him because judges believe men like Derek Collins. She lost custody 12 months ago. Derek had been hunting her since then. He was hunting her last night when he found her leaving the diner. She had seen him at the edge of the parking lot, that familiar silhouette, that familiar rage radiating off him like heat. She had run. She had run toward the French Quarter, toward the crowds, toward lights and people and cameras. He had caught her in an alley near Bourbon Street. The knife had come fast, like a blade wrapped in ice. She remembered the shock of it more than the pain. The way her body had understood it was dying before her mind caught up. 7 cuts across her ribs, each one a sentence, a curse, a promise that he would finish what he started if she ever tried to testify about what he had done to her. The same cuts he had given her 8 years ago, when they first met. The same wounds, made fresh. She had screamed and run, bleeding through the French Quarter at 3 in the morning, desperate for anything, for anyone, for a place where Derek could not reach her. The Café du Mont d'Or was the only one that opened. She did not know that inside that diner sat the most dangerous man in New Orleans. She did not know that his weak heart, damaged at 18 when his father was murdered in a warehouse shooting, would betray him the moment she collapsed beside him. She did not know that saving his life would mean Derek Collins had just made the worst mistake of his life. But the moment Matteo Vitoli's eyes opened and found hers, something shifted. His hand reached up. His fingers touched her face, leaving blood there, her blood, his blood, the blood of everything that would come next. "What is your name?" His voice was deep, solid like an oath. "Vivien," she whispered. "Vivien Bennett." He held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then Sergio was pulling her away, and doctors were moving in, and the world was splitting into before and after. Before Matteo Vitoli knew her name. After. 8 years earlier, on a September afternoon when the campus was still golden with late summer light, Vivien Bennett walked into the fundraiser gala wearing a borrowed dress that did not quite fit her shoulders. She was 21 years old, 3 semesters into nursing school, and her entire life fit inside the belief that good things happen to good people. The charity event was held in the grand ballroom of the Marriott downtown, All crystal chandeliers and waiters moving through crowds with trays of champagne she could not afford to taste. She was there because her roommate had begged her to come, had said the networking would be good, that she might meet someone important. She met Derek Collins at the silent auction table. He was 43 years old but moved through the room like a man who had never been told no. His suit was charcoal grey, tailored to his broad shoulders, and his watch caught the light every time he lifted his drink to his mouth, a watch that cost more than her tuition for an entire semester. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that had learned early how to smile in a way that made women lower their guard. He stood looking at the framed paintings waiting to be bid on, and when she approached the table, he turned and looked at her like she was the only art in the room worth examining. "You have kind eyes," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced, like a man who had delivered this line 1,000 times and meant it every single time. "Most people here are calculating. You look like you actually care about something." Vivien felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm studying nursing. I want to help people." "Nursing?" He repeated the word like it was the most beautiful profession he had ever heard. "That takes courage. That takes a specific kind of heart." He extended his hand. "Derek Collins. Real estate development. Boring by comparison." His handshake was firm but not aggressive. His fingers lingered on hers for exactly 1 second longer than necessary, which made her feel seen in a way she had never felt before. That night, he asked for her number. That week, he sent her flowers, a dozen white roses with a note that said, "For the girl with the kind eyes." That month, he took her to dinner at restaurants where the waiters knew his name, where the wine cost more than she spent on groceries in a week, where he listened to her dreams about becoming a trauma nurse with an intensity that made her feel like the most important person in his world. For 6 months, Vivien Bennett believed she had found someone who saw her, who valued her, who wanted to build something with her. The first time he grabbed her wrist too hard was on a Tuesday evening in March. They were in his apartment in the central business district, and she had mentioned that her study group was meeting at a friend's house. She had not asked permission, she had simply mentioned it the way you mention weather, the way you mention what you ate for lunch. Derek had been watching television. When she spoke, something changed in his face, a tightening around his eyes like clouds gathering before a storm. "Who is this friend?" His voice was different now, lower, careful. "Sarah. She's in my microbiology class. It's just a study group." "You will not be going to any study group." She had laughed, thinking he was joking. She was still at the stage where she thought he was joking. He had stood up from the couch. He had crossed the room in 3 steps. He had taken her wrist in his hand and squeezed it until her bones felt like they were collapsing inward, like her arm was being crushed in a vice made of flesh and rage. His face had come close to hers, and his breath smelled like the expensive scotch he had been drinking. "You belong to me," he had said. "Every hour of your day belongs to me. Every friend you have, every class, every thought in your head, it belongs to me. If I say you don't go, you don't go. Do you understand?" She had nodded. She had not understood, but she had nodded, and he had released her wrist, and she had looked down at the bruises blooming across her skin like flowers, like a map of the moment everything changed. She wore long sleeves for 2 weeks. When her roommate asked about the bruises, Vivien said she had fallen. When her mother called, Vivien said everything was perfect. When her nursing school advisor noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way she missed classes, the way her grades had begun to slip, Vivien told her it was just stress, just a difficult semester, everything was fine. Everything was not fine. The violence escalated over 8 years the way violence always does, slowly enough that you can convince yourself it is not really violence, it is just passion, it is just love expressed in a language you have learned to interpret. He pushed her into walls. He called her worthless, stupid, a burden, a mistake. He told her that no one would believe her if she tried to leave, that she was nothing without him, that she should be grateful he stayed with her at all because look at her, look at what she was, who would want this? One night in the winter of her final year of college, he had pulled off his belt and used it on her back while she lay face down on their bed. The leather sang through the air and bit into her skin with a sound like thunder, again and again, and she had not cried because crying made it worse. The scars formed afterward, raised welts running in every direction like a map of hell drawn across her shoulder blades and the small of her back. Scars she would carry for the rest of her life. Scars that would remind her, every time she showered, of the moment she understood that she was trapped. She graduated nursing school anyway. She got a job at charity hospital working the night shift. She opened a checking account he did not know about and began saving money, $5 at a time, $10 at a time, every shift where she could pocket cash and hide it away. It took her 3 years to save $4,700. It took her 6 months to gather the courage to leave. She left on a Tuesday in October, after he had fallen asleep. She packed a backpack with everything she owned that mattered, a journal, her mother's prayer card, the framed photograph of herself at her nursing school graduation, the day before everything started breaking. She left a note that said nothing because nothing she could write would matter. She drove away in her 2003 Honda Civic with the check engine light flickering like a heartbeat, driving south, toward the French Quarter, toward crowds and people and the possibility that he would not find her in the chaos. For 6 months, she was invisible. That was what survival looked like. A Walmart parking lot at night. A gym membership for $10 a week so she could shower in their facilities. A gas station bathroom where she washed her hair with paper towels and bottled water. A backpack that held everything she owned in the world. $34 in her checking account because the rent on a room was too much, because food was rationed, because she was learning what it meant to become a ghost. Derek found her 2 weeks before the diner. She had been working double shifts at Café du Monde, saving money, telling herself that one more week, one more paycheck, one more $1,000 and she could move to Baton Rouge, she could change her name, she could disappear completely. She was walking from the diner to her car at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night, her feet aching inside shoes with holes in the soles, when she saw the headlights pull in behind her at the Walmart. She knew those headlights. She knew the sound of that engine. 3 nights before she walked into the diner and collapsed beside Matteo Vitoli, Derek had dragged her from her car in an empty lot near the industrial sector, after midnight, when there were no witnesses. He had called her trash. He had called her a whore. He had said he was going to finish what he started, that she would never testify against him, that she would never escape him because he owned her and he would own her until the moment she died. He had pulled a knife from his jacket, and she had fought, pure animal instinct taking over her body, survival overriding every rational thought. She had fought and scratched and screamed, and somehow, she had managed to run, bleeding through the parking lot, bleeding through the streets, heading toward the only place she knew would let her in. The Café du Monde at 3:22 a.m. Meanwhile, in the Garden District, Catherine Mercer was asleep in a bed that cost more than a year of Vivien's salary. Catherine was 45 years old, a widow of considerable means, a woman whose social standing in New Orleans was cemented by old money and older connections. She and Derek had met 15 years ago at a charity gala much like the one where he had met Vivien. They had recognized something in each other, a hunger, a darkness, a willingness to do whatever it took to maintain power and position. Catherine had never laid hands on Vivien. Catherine did not need to. Catherine's weapon was subtler. At a luncheon 3 weeks earlier, when a mutual acquaintance had mentioned concern about Derek's recent behavior, about a girl who had disappeared from his life, Catherine had smiled her cold smile and said, "That girl is delusional, darling. Unstable. Derek is a saint for tolerating her as long as he did. She was always seeking attention, making accusations, causing drama. He is better off without someone so clearly unbalanced." By the time Vivien had walked into the diner, Catherine had already poisoned the well. She had made phone calls to journalists she knew, suggesting that if anyone came forward with accusations against Derek, they should be very careful about their claims because this particular accuser had a history of mental instability, of seeking attention, of being unreliable. Catherine had used her position on 3 non-profit boards to suggest, subtly, that Derek was a pillar of the community, a man of integrity, a man worth protecting. Catherine Mercer was still asleep when Vivien's blood began soaking through the front of Matteo Vitoli's white shirt in a diner in the French Quarter. The doctors came. Matteo's personal physician, the one who had been keeping his weak heart functioning for 25 years, arrived within 15 minutes. They took Vivien to a private room in Matteo's penthouse, the one where he kept medical equipment for his own cardiac emergencies. They stitched her up under sterile lights, 7 wounds closing in careful sutures, while Matteo stood in the doorway watching, his hand pressed to his own chest. Sergio stood beside him, silent, waiting. "Who is she?" Matteo asked quietly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his fingers. "Nobody, boss. She's nobody. A diner waitress. No family in the system, no criminal record, no connections." Matteo watched the doctor work, watched the careful stitching that was saving her life, the same life that had saved his own just hours ago by pushing on his heart when it had betrayed him. "Nobody just saved my life," he said. His eyes did not move from her face, pale and still under the harsh surgical light. "Find out everything. I want to know every detail of her life, every person she has spoken to, every reason she was bleeding in a diner at 3 in the morning." Sergio nodded and withdrew, already reaching for his phone. The doctor finished stitching. Vivien was sedated, unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Matteo stepped into the room and stood beside the bed where she lay. His hand reached out, hesitated, then settled on her shoulder, careful not to touch the bandages, careful not to hurt her further. "What is your name?" he whispered, though she could not hear him. "What brought you to me?" Outside the penthouse, the city was waking up. Rain began to fall on the streets of New Orleans, soft at first, then harder, washing the blood away from the diner floor, washing away the evidence of violence, leaving everything clean and new and ready for what would come next. The frost creeping across the penthouse windows caught the first light of dawn like tiny diamonds pressed into glass. Matteo Vitoli stood in his office overlooking the French Quarter, his tailored charcoal suit hanging perfectly on shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of every decision that had brought him here. He was 47 years old, with dark hair silvered at the temples and a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone like a blade had once tried to split his face in half. It hadn't. He was still standing. Sergio entered without knocking, a folder in his hands, his grey suit expensive but not as expensive as Matteo's. They had worked together for 15 years, which meant Sergio understood the language of Matteo's silences. The folder landed on the desk with a soft sound. "Vivien Bennett," Matteo said, reading the name aloud before Sergio could speak. 29 years old. No fixed address. No family in any system we can find. That's right, boss. She's been homeless for 8 months. Before that she worked at the Riverside Diner, night shifts, $5 an hour plus tips she rarely received. The tips were stolen most nights by her manager or by Derek Collins when he came in. Matteo's jaw tightened, a movement almost imperceptible, but Sergio had seen it before. It meant violence was calculating itself in his mind. "The money," Matteo said. $34 in her possession when we found her. That's everything she had left. There's also this. Sergio opened the folder and slid across a photograph of a restraining order, filed 8 years ago against Derek Collins. The date was stamped in red. Approved. Then stamped again in different ink. Ignored. The police? Matteo asked, though he already knew the answer. 3 officers on Derek's payroll. Captain Morris runs the precinct. He's the one who buried the case. Matteo stood and walked to the window. The city below was waking up, lights still burning in office buildings, delivery trucks moving through empty streets, the machinery of the world grinding forward without knowing that in a small penthouse, decisions were being made that would change everything. His hand pressed against the cold glass. "Medical records?" he asked. Old fractures in her left wrist, right arm, and 2 ribs. Cigarette burns on her shoulder blade. A scar on her inner thigh that matches the shape of a knife blade. And this? Sergio placed another document on the desk. A hospital admission from 6 years ago. Severe internal bleeding. Derek Collins told the nurses she had fallen downstairs. The nurses had written it down and asked no further questions. Matteo turned from the window, his dark eyes holding storms. He thought of his mother, Rosa Vitoli, 71 years old, living alone in her Garden District home with roses she tended every morning. He had installed cameras around her property 6 months ago after a rival made threats against his family. The cameras were hidden inside security lights, traffic monitors, doorbell cameras on cooperating business. They were meant to keep her safe. To keep her alive in a way nobody had kept his father alive. "I want cameras," Matteo said quietly. "Everywhere she might go. Every shelter, every parking lot, every street corner in the quarter where someone might hurt her again." Sergio's expression didn't change, but his breathing did. "Shorter. Faster. Boss, that's surveillance on 20 city blocks. Then get started." By midnight, his tech team was already installing equipment. The control room in Matteo's warehouse erupted into existence, a wall of screens showing city streets in real time, angles overlapping like a digital quilt. Rain moved across the camera feeds, and Matteo watched it fall on empty pavement where Vivien Bennett had survived 8 years of being invisible to everyone except the man who wanted her dead. He reviewed footage from 3 nights ago. The camera mounted on Jackson Square caught everything. Derek dragging her from her car, the silver blade catching streetlight, her blood hitting the pavement like rain. Derek's face twisted with something that wasn't passion but something colder, something that enjoyed the moment her body collapsed. Then Derek walking away, leaving her bleeding, leaving her to die on concrete while the city slept above her. Matteo's hands clenched into fists. His knuckles were pale, bloodless, like ice. "What are we doing, boss?" Sal asked quietly. He stood beside the screens, watching the same footage, his expensive suit somehow looking smaller when he stood next to Matteo's presence. "Protecting someone who can't protect herself." Vivien woke in a room that smelled like clean linen and winter sunlight. There were flowers on the nightstand, white roses, the kind that cost more per stem than she usually spent on food in a week. The pain in her ribs had dulled to a throb. Her wounds were bandaged professionally, the stitches precise, medical grade. Everything was wrong. She found clothes in the closet, her size, new, tags still attached. On the desk was a note written in precise handwriting. "You are safe here. Rest." Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. Just a statement of fact, as if safety was something that could be granted by decree, as if her body could simply accept shelter after 8 years of learning to expect only harm. When she tried to leave, Sergio appeared in the doorway wearing his grey suit and the expression of a man whose job was not to be questioned. "Boss wants to see you," he said. "I don't take orders," she said, but she was already moving toward the door, already carrying her backpack like it was a life raft. 3 blocks away, in a mansion on St. Charles Avenue where the walls were painted the color of old money, Catherine Mercer stood in front of her bedroom mirror. She was 56 years old, with blonde hair that cost $500 a month to maintain and a face that had been lifted so many times it was beginning to look surprised by its own reflection. Her silk robe cost more than Vivien Bennett earned in 6 months. She didn't know that. She didn't think about women like Vivien Bennett at all, except when they became useful or inconvenient. She was on the phone. "That little tramp saved Matteo Vitoli's life," she said, her voice smooth as poison poured carefully into wine. "This complicates things." The voice on the other end was Derek Collins, and it came through thick with rage. "I'll handle it," he said. "You'd better. Your sloppiness is becoming expensive." The line went dead. Catherine looked at herself in the mirror and smiled. She had built her empire by understanding one simple principle: people could be destroyed if you controlled the story they told themselves. A woman like Vivien Bennett was already broken. Catherine would just finish the work. She would make sure that nobody believed her, that everyone saw her as a liar, a gold digger, a woman trying to trap the city's most powerful man into supporting her failures. It would be easy. Catherine had done it before. 7 days later, Matteo Vitoli stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office as evening descended across New Orleans. Frost crept at the edges of the glass, winter air pressing against the city like a hand trying to squeeze it into submission. Behind him, the city lights were turning on, one by one, a constellation of small fires arranged in careful patterns. Vivien stood near the door, her backpack on her shoulders, her body angled toward escape. She had learned to always be ready to run. "Sit. Please," Matteo said. He was pouring 2 glasses of water, his movements unhurried, deliberate, as if time was something he owned. "I don't take orders well," she said. It wasn't an order. It was an invitation. She didn't sit. He walked around the desk and sat on its edge, making himself lower than her, smaller, less threatening. It was the most dangerous thing he could do because it made her want to trust him, and trust was something she had learned to recognize as a weapon. "You saved my life," he said. "You would have done the same." "Would I?" "You were bleeding. You had every reason to walk past." She shifted weight, and pain shot through her ribs where the wounds were still healing. He noticed. Everything about him noticed. "When did Derek Collins start hurting you?" he asked. She froze. Her entire body went rigid like prey that had just caught the scent of predator. "I don't know who." 8 years. "I know about the restraining order. The cops who ignored it because Derek pays them. The night he put you in the hospital and convinced the staff you fell. I know about the burns. The fractures. The knife blade on your skin." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. She was past crying. Tears required hope, and she had traded hope for survival years ago. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "Because nobody helped me when I needed it. When I was 17, hiding in a closet, watching rival dealers execute my father in our kitchen. Nobody came. Nobody protected my mother. I built this empire on that memory, on vengeance and power because protection failed us." She sat slowly, her backpack sliding to the floor. The sound it made hitting marble echoed through the office like something final. "I have $34, she said. "I can't pay you for. I don't want your money." Outside the glass, Sergio and Sal watched through the office windows. They had stood beside Matteo through 7 years of negotiations with rival families, through prison threats and federal indictments, through money laundering investigations and organized crime task forces. They had never seen him sit this close to another person without it being about violence or dominance. In 15 years, never seen him like this, Sergio muttered to Sal, his voice barely audible. "Never." 3 days later, the surveillance control room hummed with the sound of electricity and the soft clicking of keyboards. The wall of screens showed the city in real time, 100 angles of the French Quarter visible simultaneously. Vivien stood in front of them, her hands pressed to her stomach, staring at footage of herself walking through Jackson Square yesterday afternoon. Derek followed 3 blocks behind, his phone to his ear, his body language that of a predator who had already made the kill in his mind. "You've been watching me?" she asked. "I've been keeping you alive," Matteo said. "There's a difference." He pulled up another screen. A police precinct, Captain Morris shaking hands with Catherine Mercer, an envelope moving between them like a heartbeat passing from one body to another. "Who is she?" Vivien asked. "Catherine Mercer. Real estate empire, sits on 4 charity boards, hosts senators at her dinner parties. She's been Derek's alibi for 3 years. Covers his tracks. Makes you look unstable in every room where it matters. Why would she? Power. Control. Entertainment. Some people hurt others because they can." He knelt beside her chair, and the movement was so sudden, so unexpected, that she flinched backward. His voice came soft, like someone soothing a wounded animal. "I have $300,000 in liquid assets available in 3 days. We use it to protect you legally, set you up somewhere safe, get you away from the city if that's what you need. $300,000. Her voice cracked. "Are you insane?" "I'm nobody. I'm homeless. I sleep in my car and steal soap from gas stations, and you're talking about You're the woman who saved my life when you had every reason to save yourself first. That makes you somebody to me." She looked at him then, really looked, seeing past the expensive suit to the 17-year-old boy who had watched his father die while the world did nothing to stop it. 5 days later, afternoon light slanted through the library windows in pale gold rectangles. Vivien sat at a computer terminal, researching legal options, restraining orders, victim advocacy programs, anything that might give her ground to stand on. A small boy approached, maybe 6 years old, his hair messy, his clothes slightly too big for his frame. He held a drawing in his hand, crayon on white paper, a family holding hands, stick figures with smiles too big for their heads. "Is this your family?" he asked. Vivien's throat tightened. "No, sweetheart. I don't have." Matteo appeared behind her with Sergio and Sal, carrying coffee, pastries, his presence suddenly making the entire library aware that something powerful had entered it. The librarian stared. Whispers started, spreading like ripples through water. The boy looked up at them. "Are they your family?" he asked Vivien. She looked at Matteo, at his men standing protective nearby, at the surveillance photo tucked in his folder showing his mother's garden, roses blooming in winter sunlight. "I don't know yet," she said. Matteo sat beside her and opened a folder. Evidence his team had compiled, Derek's financial crimes, payoffs to cops, bank transfers that proved Catherine's involvement in covering up 2 other abuse cases. 2 other women. 2 other lives destroyed. "We can take them down," Matteo said. "Both of them. But you have to testify. You have to be willing to stand in front of the world and say what they did. The world already thinks I'm crazy. Catherine made sure of that. Then we make them listen." His phone buzzed. Sergio read a message, and his face darkened like a storm moving across open water. "Boss. Derek just posted Vivien's home address on 6 social media platforms. Says she's dangerous, unstable, making false accusations. It's going viral." Matteo stood slowly, deadly calm, the kind of calm that comes before violence remembers how to move. "Then we move now," he said. But what Vivien didn't know was that Catherine Mercer had already called in favors with the district attorney, trying to block any testimony before it could even begin. The boy left his drawing on the table when he departed. Vivien clutched it, staring at the Crane family, at the stick figures holding hands, at the future she didn't know how to believe in yet. The warehouse district stretched empty under a December sky turning the color of bruised steel. Rain fell in sheets now, sleet mixing with frost, each drop hitting the pavement like a tiny fist demanding entrance. Vivien Bennett sat on the concrete steps of a shuttered building, her backpack beside her, a letter folded in her trembling hands. The knife wound across her ribs throbbed with the cold, a permanent map of 8 years of violence she had finally decided to escape. She had written the letter in the safe house while Sergio slept in the chair by the door, his hand resting on his weapon even in rest. While Matteo was out meeting with federal agents. While Micah colored in the library, drawing stick figures holding hands, drawing a family that didn't exist except in Crane and hope. The letter read, "I love you. I didn't mean to. I don't have the right to feel this way about a man like you, about a world I was never meant to survive in. But you showed me what protection looks like. You showed me what it means when someone chooses to stay. And I cannot let Derek and Catherine burn down everything you built because you were kind to a woman worth $34 and a backpack. I'm leaving tonight. Don't look for me. Thank you for teaching me I was worth saving, even if I have to save you by going." The handwriting wavered where her tears had fallen, ink bleeding into watercolor streaks. She had rewritten it 7 times. Each version hurt more than the last. Vivien had $47 in her pocket. A change of clothes. The child's drawing folded carefully in the pocket closest to her heart. She had memorized the bus schedule. Memphis first, then Nashville, then somewhere far enough away that the name Vivien Bennett wouldn't drag Matteo Vitoli's empire into federal crosshairs. Derek would hunt her. Catherine would use her social influence to make sure every shelter, every social service, every safe space turned Vivien away. But that was Vivien's burden to carry alone. Not his. The headlights cut through the darkness like a blade. A black Mercedes, expensive enough to cost more than every apartment she'd ever lived in, pulled to a stop 15 feet away. The engine ticked as it cooled. The driver's door opened. Matteo Vitoli stepped out into the sleet, alone. No Sergio. No Sal. No men in black suits standing guard. Just him in a charcoal suit with frost gathering on his shoulders like diamonds under the city's pale streetlights. His dark eyes found her face, read the letter still clutched in her hands, and something broke open in his expression. He walked toward her, each step deliberate, measured, unhurried. The same walk he used when entering a room full of men who feared him. But now his eyes were different. Raw. Exposed. Like a fortress with its gates thrown open. You were going to leave without saying goodbye. His voice came out rough, like he had been shouting. She held up the letter. Her hand shook from cold and from the weight of loving someone she had no right to love. Matteo took the letter, unfolded it with careful fingers, read it under the streetlight while sleet fell around them both. His jaw clenched. His shoulders tensed. For a long moment he stood there, rain darkening his suit, the letter trembling slightly in his grip. When he finished reading, he looked at her with something raw and dangerous stirring in his chest. But the danger wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at every person who had ever made her feel small. Every person who had convinced her she wasn't worth saving. Family is not always bound by blood, Vivien. His voice came out deep and solid like an oath. It's bound by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. I choose you. Stay. She dropped the backpack. It fell to the wet concrete with the soft thud of everything she had planned to lose. He took her hand, her cold, shaking hand, and pulled her toward the Mercedes. The interior was warm. Leather seats. Classical music playing softly. Another world entirely. We're going to end this, Matteo said, and his tone made it clear that Derek Collins's life as he knew it was already over. 48 hours later, dawn broke clear and freezing over New Orleans. 12 men in black tactical gear moved like ghosts through Derek Collins's apartment in the French Quarter. Federal agents, armed with Matteo's evidence, his cameras, his carefully documented trail of violence and corruption. They moved in synchronized silence, the kind of silence that comes before the world changes. Derek was still in bed when they breached the door. Still dreaming of a life where he mattered. Where he could hunt women through crowded streets and call it love. Where his connections to bent cops and corrupt judges meant he would never face consequences. The real world arrived in the form of handcuffs and a federal badge. Derek Collins collapsed on the morning news, trembling like a cornered animal, begging for mercy that would never come. His face went white when the agent read him his rights. His voice cracked when they mentioned the cameras. The surveillance footage. Every moment of his chase through the city streets caught in digital amber, preserved forever. I didn't do anything, he screamed. She's lying. Check the cameras. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. The very cameras he had mocked, the surveillance system meant to protect a criminal empire, had become the instrument of his destruction. Catherine Mercer's arrest happened simultaneously at her Garden District mansion, in the middle of a charity breakfast with 20 of the city's wealthiest socialites watching. FBI agents in dark suits marched through her gardens, past the fountain imported from Italy, up the marble steps of a house that had sheltered her cruelty for decades. They took her in handcuffs while her guests sat frozen, forks halfway to mouths, understanding in that instant that they had been sitting beside a predator all along. Catherine's composure shattered like glass hitting marble. Do you know who I am? Her voice hit a pitch it had never reached before. This is a mistake. My family has connections. My father will. Your father can't help you now, the agent said, his voice flat and final. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. You're done, Ms. Mercer. Completely done. Within 1 hour, both arrests streamed live across every news outlet in Louisiana. Within 3 hours, the footage had gone viral. 500,000 views. Then 1 million. By sunset, 2 million people had watched Derek Collins collapse. Had seen Catherine Mercer's face drain of color as the handcuffs clicked into place. Derek's allies, the bent cops, the judges he'd paid off, the business partners who'd profited from his silence, released statements immediately. Distancing themselves. Condemning him. Abandoning him to save their own sinking ships. Catherine's social circle issued a joint statement: "We had no knowledge of her activities. We stand with her alleged victims. We are devastated to learn of her involvement." Translation: we are afraid. We will testify against her. We will save ourselves. The federal investigation that followed revealed what Matteo's team had already known. Catherine Mercer had covered up abuse for 6 other men over 15 years. 6 other women whose names she had buried in legal paperwork and social manipulation. 6 other lives she had deemed expendable in service of maintaining her status. Derek Collins faced 40 years in federal prison. Assault. Stalking. Witness tampering. Attempted murder. His real estate empire dissolved within a week, assets seized, bank accounts frozen. His name became synonymous with cruelty. With the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about. Catherine Mercer faced 35 years. The investigation into her activities continued, growing like a root system beneath the surface of the city's wealth, threatening to expose decades of hidden violence. Justice, not death. Too quick. Too easy. Too merciful. They would live with the consequences of their cruelty until their bodies gave out behind bars. They would have plenty of time to remember every woman they'd hurt. Plenty of time to understand what it meant to be powerless. Vivien Bennett watched the arrests on the news from Matteo's penthouse, the city lights spread out beneath them like fallen stars. Sergio brought her coffee. Sal brought her mica, who had been staying with them for 3 days, drawing more pictures, filling pages with color. The boy looked up from his artwork when the footage of Derek's arrest played on the television. "Is he the bad man?" Micah asked. His voice was small, careful, innocent in a way that made Vivien's heart crack open. "Yes," she said. "He was the bad man. But he won't be able to hurt anyone anymore." "Good," Micah said, and returned to his drawing. He colored a sun rising over a house. Golden yellow, bright enough to chase away shadows. In his drawing, the family stood together, safe beneath that rising sun. Matteo stood in the doorway, watching them. His phone buzzed with updates from his lawyers. Derek's confession was admissible. Catherine's network was crumbling. Federal agents had found documentation stretching back 2 decades. But Matteo barely heard any of it. He was watching Vivien touch the child's hair with such gentleness, with such care. Watching a woman who had survived 8 years of violence finally let herself believe in safety. The next chapter was already unfolding. Different from what had come before. Better. Harder to believe in, but better. Vivien felt his presence before she turned. She always did now. "What happens next?" she asked him. "Now we live," Matteo said. "Now we choose the life instead of just surviving it." The child looked up. "Can we stay here? With you?" Matteo crossed the room in 3 steps and sat beside them both. His men would have been shocked to see him there, sitting close, making space for a child and a woman who had entered his life through trauma and stayed because of something deeper than fear. Something deeper than the underworld ever taught him. "Yes," he said. "You can stay." The family Micah had drawn in crayon was becoming real. One color at a time. One choice at a time. One moment of staying when the easy thing would have been to leave. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Criminals and heroes, violence and mercy, poverty and power, all spinning together in the December cold. But inside this penthouse, above the streets where Vivien had once slept in her car, something new was growing. Something that looked like safety. Something that felt like home. 3 months later, the November cold had finally released its grip on New Orleans. Spring arrived early, soft and hesitant, and the Garden District bloomed like a promise kept. Rosa Vitale's garden exploded with roses, deep reds, pale pinks, cream-colored blooms that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. Vivien knelt in the dirt beside Rosa, her hands wrapped around a trowel that felt foreign but right, soil caked beneath her fingernails in a way that spoke of life being built rather than survival being stolen. Rosa Vitale was 71 years old, her silver hair pulled back in a simple braid, her eyes the same storm gray as her son's but softened by decades of choosing mercy over vengeance. She wore a gardening apron faded from decades of use, and she moved through her roses with the tenderness of someone tending to children. She placed a hand on Vivien's shoulder, steady, warm, present, and didn't pull away. "Matteo never brought anyone to meet me before," Rosa said. Her voice was like honey over gravel, rough and sweet at once. "Not once in 43 years. You must be special." Vivien's hand stilled in the soil. "I'm just nobody," Rosa finished. She smiled, and it held no judgment, only recognition. "Yes. He told me you keep saying that. But nobody doesn't save my son's life, Vivien. Nobody doesn't stand up in federal court and testify even when she's terrified enough to stop breathing." The older woman reached down and snapped a rose from its stem, deep red, perfect, each petal unblemished. She pressed it into Vivien's palm. "Your family now," Rosa said. "Whether you accept it or not." Inside the house, in the surveillance control room on the 3rd floor, Matteo Vitale sat alone before a wall of monitors. The cameras he had installed across the city no longer served the purpose they once did. Derek Collins was locked in federal holding, awaiting trial. Catherine Mercer's assets were frozen, her social networks in ruins, her name becoming synonymous with exploitation and cruelty. The hunt was over. But the cameras remained, and Matteo had discovered something unexpected in their continued operation: they could protect instead of surveil. They could shield instead of capture. Monitor 12 showed Rosa's garden in real time. He watched Vivien laugh, a real laugh, not the trembling ghost of one, as his mother looped an arm through hers and pulled her toward the rose beds. His mother had never done that for anyone. Not since his father died. Something in his chest unwound, thread by thread. Sergio appeared in the doorway, moving with the careful steps of a man entering a room where the rules had changed. In 6 months, everything had shifted. The cameras, the evidence, the absolute dismantling of Derek's network, it had all happened because the boss had decided that one woman mattered more than empire maintenance. "Federal prosecutor called," Sergio said. His voice carried the weight of information that had once seemed impossible. Both convictions had held. Derek's plea deal dissolved into multiple felony counts. Catherine's trial date was set for next month. "Wants to thank you for the evidence. Both cases are solid." Matteo didn't turn from the monitors. "Good. Derek's already in federal holding. Catherine's lawyers are filing motion after motion, but the assets stay frozen. The wire transfers you provided, they're smoking guns, boss. Every single one documented, dated, traceable." "And the girl?" Matteo asked. The word landed with intention. Sergio paused. The mistake hung between them for 2 seconds before understanding arrived. "Vivien," he said. Not a question. A correction. "What about Vivien?" "She stays," Matteo said. "As long as she wants. As long as she needs. As long as she chooses." Sergio nodded, and something that had been tight in his shoulders released. He had known this man for 15 years, had watched him build empires and burn bridges and make decisions that echoed through the underworld like gunshots in a tunnel. But this was the first decision that seemed to echo toward light instead of darkness. That evening, Vivien moved into the guest house on Rosa's property. It was small, 2 rooms painted pale yellow, with a window that faced east toward the rising sun. A bed with white sheets. A kitchen where food could be kept. A bathroom with hot water that didn't run brown. For the first time in 9 years, she wasn't sleeping in her car. Matteo brought dinner at 7 o'clock. He carried it himself, lasagna from a restaurant in the quarter, salad with vinaigrette that cost more than she used to earn in a day, bread still warm from the oven, wine with a label she didn't recognize. She set the table, her hands shaking slightly, still not fully believing this was real. They sat on the porch, the spring air moving across their skin like a gentle promise. Above them, stars emerged sharp and clear, puncturing the darkness with light that had traveled impossible distances just to be seen. "The cameras," Vivien said. "You told everyone they were for your mother. For her protection in the garden district while you were away." Matteo turned to face her fully. "They were. They are. And now they're for you too. And for the 43 other people whose cases we're building. And for the 78 potential victims we're monitoring for signs of escalating danger. Protection isn't selective, Vivien. It's absolute or it's meaningless." She pulled out the child's drawing, the one Micah had left on her last night at the safe house. Crane family holding hands beneath a sun rising bright yellow. It was framed now, hanging above her bed in this small yellow room that was beginning to feel like home. "I think I'm starting to understand what family means," she said. He took her hand the way he had that night in the rain, palm steady, grip firm but not crushing. "Good. Because we're not letting you go." 6 months after the arrests came through, autumn had returned to New Orleans. Leaves fell from oak trees in the garden district like memories released from weight they could no longer carry. Vivien worked now as a victim advocate, helping others navigate the systems that had nearly broken her. She sat across desks from terrified people who had $34 in their pockets and looked at her with the hollow eyes of those who believed they were nobody, and she told them a story about a woman who wasn't supposed to survive, who saved a man's life, and who discovered that family is built not from blood but from the choice to stay. Derek Collins and Catherine Mercer were both serving their sentences. Federal prison, no parole eligibility, no early release possibilities. Their empire had been dismantled piece by piece. The wire transfers documented everything. The recordings Vivien had secretly kept, her own insurance policy during those final months, had corroborated every claim. Justice had arrived like a sunrise, slow and then all at once. Vivien visited Rosa twice a week. They tended the roses together, and Rosa taught her the names of every flower, the requirements of each bloom, the way some needed more sun and others thrived in shade. Sunday dinner happened every week without fail. Matteo's legitimate businesses, the restaurants, the construction companies, the security firms that had been laundering money for 15 years, were being converted into legal operations. His foundation, established in Vivien's name, provided resources for abuse survivors across the state. In the surveillance control room, Vivien and Matteo stood before the wall of monitors training new staff. Young people hired from struggling neighborhoods, given uniforms and salaries and the knowledge that their work protected people who had been invisible for too long. "We started with one person who needed help," Matteo said, pointing to the screens. "Now we protect 53. Next month, 70. The year after, 200. Your father would be proud," Vivien said. "What you built from that pain. What you're still building." Matteo turned to face her fully. His scar caught the light from the monitors, the one that ran from temple to cheekbone, a reminder of the violence he had survived and the violence he had chosen not to become. "He'd be proud of you too," he said. "Turning your survival into someone else's protection." She looked at the wall of screens, Monitor 3 showing the shelter for women escaping abuse, Monitor 7 showing the clinic that served the uninsured, Monitor 12 showing Rosa's garden blooming despite the coming winter. She looked at each screen and saw not invasion but guardianship. Not control but care. Every camera was a promise that someone was watching, that these invisible people mattered, that their lives had value. "I used to think I was nobody," Vivien said. Her voice didn't shake anymore. "No family. No home. Nothing worth protecting. Everything I had could fit in one backpack. I had $34 to my name and a future that looked like a closed door." "And now?" he asked. Now I know that family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. And I choose to stay." He kissed her forehead, and Rosa's garden bloomed on the screen beside them, roses surviving the autumn chill because someone had chosen to tend them, to feed them, to believe they were worth the effort of care. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they are worth protecting, that their survival matters, that chosen family is real family. Subscribe because tomorrow we bring you another story of power, protection, and the families we build from the ruins of what tried to destroy us. Comment below, what does family mean to you? We read every single comment. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. We will see you in the next video.